They were lined up like livestock, stripped of names, reduced to numbers. The sun pressed down hard on their backs, dust stinging their eyes, while 100 cold stares cut through them like blades. She stood at the very edge, barefoot on the dry earth, wrists tied tight, the bottom of her dress frayed and torn. Her eyes weren't on the men, not on the auctioneer's twisted grin, not even on the chalkboard behind him, where their worth was scratched out in chalk like a curse. She looked past it all, gazing into a distance only she could see. The crowd didn't see her as human, not truly. Their mouths moved through tobacco-stained teeth, fingers fiddling with coins like it was just another transaction. She'd long stopped listening to the words. All that mattered was the tone. Hunger, contempt, boredom. When the bidding began, it turned into a wall of noise, hands in the air, numbers shouted over each other, laughter that snapped like a whip. And then, someone didn't laugh. At the far edge of the crowd stood a man, dust-covered coat, wide-brimmed hat casting shadow over his face. He stood silent, unmoving. His boots were scuffed, his back straight. He said nothing, didn't even shift. But the moment her number was read out loud, he raised 2 fingers. No words, just the gesture. A few men snorted in amusement. One spat and sneered, "You want that one? Hell, leave her to rot." The cowboy didn't flinch, didn't look their way. Another bidder tossed out a higher number, casual and careless. The man responded without hesitation, fingers raised again, the bid going up. That was it. Nobody else cared to compete for a girl like her. Too dark, too silent, too used up. And no one in their right mind wanted to test a man who looked like he'd risk death for something others threw away. The auctioneer shrugged, called it done. The cowboy walked forward, quiet as ever. He reached into his coat, pulled out a folded bill, and handed it over without a single word. Then he stepped to her side, pulled a pocket knife from his belt, and cut through the ropes around her wrists. She didn't flinch. He offered her a shawl, not clean, but thick enough to hold some warmth. Then he turned, started walking. She didn't follow right away. He paused, glanced back once. His expression revealed nothing, but he gave her a single nod, just enough to make it feel like she had a choice. And that's what made her go. They rode together in silence, side by side. His horse moved slowly. Hers was tied behind. She said nothing, and he didn't press her. The desert stretched endlessly around them, vast and quiet. The wind carried nothing but heat and silence. Once the last trace of town faded behind them, he finally brought the horses to a stop, just off the main trail, beside the dry bed of an old creek. There was nothing there but a ring of stones for fire, a barrel long since emptied of water. He dismounted without a word, pulled down some jerky, a dented tin cup, and a thin, time-worn blanket, laid them out with slow, quiet hands. Then he walked a few paces away and sat beneath a crooked tree, saying nothing. She stayed where she was for a long time. He gave no instructions, no invitation, not even a glance. Just space, real space. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't hear someone coming up behind her. No voice barking demands. No hand grabbing at her to pull her somewhere she didn't want to go. Only the wind. So she sat down. Not close, but not far either. That night, the stars burned cold overhead. The fire barely held a flame. She didn't sleep, but she didn't run. Dawn was slow in coming, rolling over the hills in a soft wash of gold. Her eyes hadn't closed once. But when the first light touched her skin, something deep inside shifted, just slightly. Not peace, not safety, but something close. He was already awake, seated by the fire's remains, quietly rewrapping his saddlebag. No breakfast, no firewood, no conversation, just movement. She drew the shawl tighter around her shoulders and watched him, waiting for the command that never came. Then he stood, tossed a half-full canteen in her direction. She caught it instinctively. He climbed back on his horse without a single word. So she followed him again, because there wasn't anything telling her not to. The trail was dry, stretching endlessly ahead. By midday, the heat shimmered across the horizon, making the air bend and blur like mirages of water that never arrived. The only sound was the steady rhythm of hooves and the wind brushing across dead brush and old bones. As the sun dipped lower, they came upon a small cabin, built low into the rocks, less of a home and more of a shelter. There was one door. No windows. A sagging fence of splintered wood out front. The kind of place someone builds when they're not expecting company. He got off his horse. Didn't glance back at her. Opened the door. Left it open. She lingered outside for a while before finally stepping through. The air inside was thick with the scent of dust and old with smoke. There was a stove in the corner, a narrow bed, and a second cot folded against the wall. A cracked basin sat dry nearby. No photographs. She didn't ask who had lived here. She could tell no one had in a long while. But it was his. You could tell by how he moved inside it, like every inch of the place already knew him. He didn't explain anything. Didn't need to. He unfolded the spare cot, set it up across the room. Still no words. Just a quiet motion that said everything. This is yours. You're not family. But you're safe. She sat on the edge of the cot, let her shoulders finally drop. He lit a lantern, pulled a tin from the shelf, and set out 2 cups, one in front of himself, one in front of her. She didn't move toward it. He poured anyway. Steam drifted up between them. The silence filled the rest. That night, the wind clawed at the door like it was testing the wood. But she didn't flinch. She kept her gaze steady on the flame inside the lantern, small, unwavering, and stubborn. He slept in the chair, not deeply, not comfortably. The kind of half-sleep that comes only when there's nothing left to do but wait for morning. Sometime around midnight, she stood and gently placed the shawl over his shoulders. He didn't wake, but his fingers twitched just slightly, as if some distant part of him remembered what kindness felt like, even if it didn't know what to do with it. Back in town, the men who had seen the auction talked among themselves. "Don't make a damn bit of sense," one said, shaking his head. "Dropping coin on a woman like that, walking off like he's some preacher or saint." Another spat in the dirt. "Bet she's got plans." The quiet ones always do. But no one went after him. He wasn't the kind of man you follow. Not unless you're ready to bleed for it. By the third morning, she was up before him. She swept the floor with a dry branch, folded the cot neatly, boiled water without spilling a drop. Her hands remembered more than she expected. He watched from the doorway. Said nothing. Just gave her a quiet nod. Barely noticeable. But enough. They worked through the morning, repairing the fence, checking the well, gathering what little the land would give. She moved with purpose. Silent but sure. He handed her tools without asking what she needed. She caught them without looking. By noon, the silence between them had changed. It wasn't emptiness anymore. It had become rhythm. Later that day, he rode into town alone. No warning. No goodbye. No lock on the door. Just rode off slow, like he trusted the wind to let her know he'd return. She stayed inside most of the day. Didn't touch any of his things. Just moved around the room carefully, like someone learning the shape of a place and beginning to believe she wouldn't be punished for crossing its edges. Near sundown, he came back. Flour, beans, and a worn pair of boots. She didn't ask who they were for. He didn't say, but she placed them beside her cot anyway. That night, they ate together for the first time. No words passed between them. No prayers. Just bread, beans, and firelight. At one point, he looked at her hands, scarred, strong, calloused, but still moving with quiet precision. She didn't notice, but he did. When the plates were cleared, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather book. It was old, cracked, and mostly empty. He placed it on the table. She touched it gently, like it might break. He didn't tell her what to do with it. Didn't need to. She opened it, wrote her name. The next day, a man rode up to the cabin. White. Vest clean, boots polished, smile too smooth. He tipped his hat. "Well now," he said lightly, "didn't expect to see you way out here. A man like you, keeping company like this." Thomas stepped between them, not quickly, but with purpose. "This land don't take to visitors," he said. The man laughed. "I can see that. Just checking if you'd lost your mind. Folks talk." Thomas didn't move. The man's smile faded. "Well, maybe you got your reasons. Ain't my business what a man does with what he buys." Then his eyes drifted toward her. Not the way Thomas looked at her. The way the crowd had. Predator. Possession. She didn't flinch. She just stared back. When he turned to leave, he spat in the dirt. Thomas stayed still a long while after. Didn't speak. Didn't look at her. But his hand rested close to the axe handle. That night, he moved his chair just a little closer to her cot. Didn't sit in it. But closer meant something. The days passed slowly. He worked the land. She worked the home. No roles assigned. No lines drawn. But they moved in orbit now. Not touching. Not avoiding. Sharing space. Sharing silence. Sharing sky. She cleaned the windows with rags sewn from old shirts. Hung her washed clothes on a line that creaked in the wind. Planted something by the door. She didn't know what it would grow into, but she needed to believe something could. He built a shelf. Didn't put anything on it. Just left it there, like it was waiting for something meaningful. One day, while sweeping the porch, she heard a wagon pass down the road. Inside, a little girl sat staring back, hair like hers, eyes wide, silent. Their gazes met for just a moment, but she didn't look away, and the girl barely smiled. That evening, he fixed the hinge on the table. Outside, the light dipped warm and orange. Her movement slowed, not out of laziness, but like she'd stopped expecting to be rushed. He ate with the same quiet rhythm, then reached for something in his coat. A small tin box. He slid it across the table. She didn't open it right away. When she did, she found a few simple things. Matches. A button. A folded piece of paper. Inside. "You're free, but you don't have to go." She said nothing, but her fingers closed the paper with care. That night, he sat closer to her than before. She watched the fire flicker across the beams above, then stood, walked to the shelf, took the book he'd given her, turned to a fresh page, and wrote. Staying is harder than running. She left the book open on the table, returned to her cot, and slept, this time deeply, as if something inside her had finally stopped fleeing. In town, some men whispered over drinks. "He's got her up there, living like a wife," one said. "Reckon he's lost it," another muttered, treating her like she's worth more than gold. But no one rode out, because by then, everyone in 3 counties knew. You don't go near that man's line unless you're ready to never come back. The first snow came early, thin, quiet, drifting like ash across the roof. It didn't stay long, but it changed the land, softened it. Like the world itself wanted to pause. That morning, she stepped outside with her shawl wrapped tight, sleeves rolled to her elbows. The cold bit at her knuckles, but she didn't flinch. He was already out there, chopping with bare arms, jaw clenched, lost in focus. She watched for a while, then walked over, picked up a log, and stacked it beside him. He paused. She met his gaze calm, steady. He nodded once, and kept swinging. They worked together until the sun climbed higher, and the frost melted from the grass. Later, she sat on the porch, boots near the fire. He brought her a tin cup and set it beside her coffee, burnt and strong. She sipped, didn't thank him, but her silence said she noticed. And his silence answered, that was enough. That afternoon, she found an old coat in the back room, stiff at the shoulders, built for a man. She patched the lining with thread pulled from her dress hem, then draped it over the back of his chair. She didn't wait to see his reaction. He didn't say a word when he saw it, just wore it the next morning, and kept wearing it after that. One evening, a new stranger came walking up the path. This one was different, rough beard, glassy eyes, mouth that never quite closed. She saw him first through the window and tensed. Thomas stepped outside before the man could knock. They stood face to face. The wind moved between them. "Just passing through," the man said. "Heard you had company. Thought maybe I could take her off your hands." Thomas didn't answer, didn't blink. He just shifted his coat enough to show what was on his belt. The man stiffened. "You ain't like the rest of us, huh?" Still, Thomas said nothing. The man spat in the dirt. "Ain't right," he said, turning, treating her like she's more than what she is. Then he walked off and didn't look back. That night, Thomas barely touched his food. She cleaned the dishes in silence, sat at the far end of the table. But before the fire went out, she stood, crossed to the shelf, opened the book, and turned to the 3rd page. She wrote, "You don't have to speak to make it known." She left it open, not for herself, but for him. And when she turned, he was looking. Not just at the page. At her. As if, for the first time, he understood what it really meant to be seen. And what it cost to truly see someone. A week later, the snow came back, heavier this time. It blanketed the land, swallowed the fence posts, made the world feel far away. Like the earth had forgotten it was ever warm. Inside, the stove burned low and steady. She kept the pot simmering, stirred without rush. He sat by the window, sharpening a blade, checking the edge with his thumb. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. They moved like people who'd learned how to survive winter together. At night, she started to hum. Soft, low, almost like a breath more than a sound. A tune without words. Older than memory. He never asked what it was. But he always moved closer when she did. And she always hummed just before sleep. One morning, she found a sack of apples on the table. Hard. Cold. But whole. He'd left before dawn. No note. She cleaned them, sliced a few, baked something like she remembered her mother used to make. The scent filled the house, something warm, something old, something almost like home. When he returned, boots frozen, face bitten red by the wind, he stopped in the doorway. Didn't smile, he never did. But he took off his hat slower than usual, sat down quicker, and stayed longer. Later that night, she stepped out onto the porch. Snowflakes caught in her lashes. Her breath curled into clouds. She didn't go far, just stood near the edge, staring up at a sky full of quiet stars. Behind her, the door creaked. She didn't turn, but he stepped outside and stood next to her. No words, no gesture, just presence. When Thomas came back inside, he sat down and took off his coat. She poured him coffee. His hands trembled once when he lifted the cup. She said nothing, just sat across from him, and set the tin box, the same one he once filled with matches and mercy, on the table again. This time, he opened it, unfolded the paper. Her handwriting was still there, still waiting. That night, he didn't sleep in the chair, and she didn't sleep on the cot. They didn't speak, didn't touch, but they lay close enough to feel the warmth of each other's breath. The wind pushed hard against the house, but inside, it was still. Not perfect, not permanent, but safe. And that was enough. The days after were quiet, but not like before. Something had shifted. A line had been crossed, not just because of the law that never came, but because of the moment he stepped between it and her without hesitation. She moved differently now, not cautiously, not carefully, but freely, like even the air had grown lighter around her. She planted more, scrubbed deeper, rearranged the shelves like she truly intended to live with them. He noticed, but didn't say a thing. He fixed the hinge on the front gate, painted the porch with the last of the whitewash from the barn. They never talked about what could have happened, or what still might, but their hands spoke clearly. They wanted this place to last. One evening, she came in from the garden, dirt on her knees, something unreadable on her face. She sat down slow, looked at her hands. He was at the table, mending a strap. She didn't speak for a long time. Then quietly, almost unsure, she said, "He'll send someone else." Thomas didn't even look up. "Let him," he said. And that was all. She reached into her apron, pulled out a sun-warmed stone, and placed it on the table between them. He looked at it, then at her. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. Some things don't need to be named to be understood. That night, she opened the book again, turned to a clean page, wrote slower now, not because she was uncertain, but because every word mattered. Some people come into your life like fire, but you came like shade. I didn't know I needed either. She left it open, not by chance, but because she knew he'd look. The next morning, sunlight poured strong through the eastern window. She woke with his arm near hers, not holding, just resting. Their breathing moved in rhythm. She stood, dressed, lit the fire. When he came in, she poured coffee, set his cup in its usual place. But her movement was softer now, like this wasn't just what life gave her. It was what she chose. Out by the fence, he found a small bird caught in wire, brown, shaking, wild-eyed. He called for her. The first time he'd ever done that. She came quickly. Together they untangled it, her fingers steadier than his. The bird flew off, left behind a feather in the grass. She picked it up, smiled faintly, and he watched her with awe. like a man who never thought something beautiful could grow in a place like this. Summer came, dust in the wind, heat in the wood, sky stretched wide with nothing left to say. The cabin breathed differently now. Windows open, breezes moving through. She moved with ease, through the rooms, through the space between them. No more waiting, no more shrinking. Her hands folded laundry like they belonged here. His boots tracked dust across the floor, and she never rushed to sweep it away. Some marks are better left. He fixed the roof. She planted corn. Together they lined the well with stones, not out of need, but because it felt right to mark where water lived. One morning, he found her on the porch before dawn, hair braided, hands wrapped around a cup. He sat beside her. They listened, birds, wind, stillness. Then she said, "I never thought I'd live this long." He didn't answer with words. He just reached for her hand. Not gently, not roughly, just real. She leaned her head to his shoulder, not because she had to, but because she could. The letter never came. No lawman. No threats. Maybe they forgot. Maybe someone warned them. Maybe the world just moved on. Whatever the reason, it didn't matter. He stopped checking the rifle. She stopped watching the road. The dog slept at the door instead of guarding it. Peace didn't shout. It arrived quietly. And stayed. That fall, she carved her name into the beam above the porch. Not the name she was given. The one she chose. Not small. Not hidden. Just hers. He carved his beside it. Not touching, but close. They never married. No preacher came. No documents changed hands. But when the census man arrived and asked for her name, she looked to Thomas. He gave a single nod. She turned back and answered. Claire Marlowe. That night, she opened the book to its final page. The writing was steadier now, more certain. Freedom isn't leaving. It's choosing where to stay. She set the book on the shelf, beside the tin box, beside the feather, beside the stone. The shelf was full now. Outside, Thomas sat on the porch, watching stars. She joined him, wrapped in the same shawl he gave her that first day. No longer torn, now worn with memory. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. In the dark, in the stillness, in the space they built between silence and shelter. They simply were.